The Kenyan village of Lokichoggio, often just called Loki, is an unremittingly dry and rocky place, with an eclectic mix of rough international types, businessmen, tribal Turkana, haggard relief workers, doctors, pilots, nurses, missionaries, and shady arms dealers. And beer. Loki is the major UN aid center for southern Sudanese fleeing civil war in the Sudan, and the main supply center for NGOs within Sudan, with hundreds of personnel, Kenya's busiest airfield, and numerous bars for tired and frustrated relief workers. Ironically enough, Loki is also the center for arms running into Sudan. Poke around some of the dukas, and you'll find AK-47s, ammunition, and even bombs openly for sale.
Welcome to Lokichoggio. 10 years ago, there was nothing here but a dirt airstrip, some Turkana, their goats, and us. We lived in tents back then. The showers were a couple of hoses attached to a 55-gallon drum perched atop a Connex box and painted black so the sun would heat the water. The water came from a borehole a couple of miles away and was brought to the camp in a tank mounted on a trailer. It was transferred to the 55-gallon drum using a rotary hand pump. The toilets back then were long drops, canvas enclosures concealing a wooden box with a toilet seat perched atop a deep pit dug into the red soil and salted with quicklime. Electric power was provided by an old diesel generator which illuminated the single bulb and table fan we had in each tent. I'd never seen so many stars as studded the skies on those clear desert nights. When the yellow-red disk of the full moon broke the horizon, backlighting the mountain we call Diamond Head, well, it would make a poet weep.
I first came to this part of Africa 15 years ago. It was October of 1988. Prior to that, I was up in Ethiopia with Southern Air Transport flying relief supplies for Caritas, the relief arm of the Roman Catholic Church, and WFP, the United Nations World Food Program. We were flying to a little town on the Ethiopia-Sudan border called Aware when the first refugees began to stumble across the border into Ethiopia looking for food. If you remember back then, looking for food in Ethiopia was a pretty low percentage move. The United Nations sent some medical assessment teams down to take a look at these people to see what kind of condition they were in. And they determined that they were in about as bad shape as the survivors of the Cambodian death marches back in the 1970s. In response to this finding, the World Food Program contracted with Southern Air Transport to send an airplane and some crews down to the Entebbe airport in Uganda for a 30-day operation to fly food up into the southern Sudanese city of Juba on the Nile River. Juba was a fairly famous city in its day. It was the provincial capital of Equatoria province. And back in the days of the British Raj, it was the seat of government for the famous Charles Chinese Gordon, the general who lost his life in the Mahdi Rebellion up in Khartoum. In 1988, Juba was surrounded by rebels from the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, known as the SPLA. The SPLA had threatened to shoot down any airplane that tried to break the blockade into the city. And in fact, they had made good on that threat by hitting a Nile Safari's aviation Boeing 707 with a rocket-propelled grenade. After that incident, no food had gotten into the city for 6 months, and the death toll from starvation was running about 25 a week. It was against that backdrop that Southern Air first arrived on the scene. And in those days, we were all lived under a death threat as the SPLA threatened that they would shoot down our airplanes if we attempted to break their blockade. We successfully broke the blockade, obviously, and from that incident grew this organization known as Operation Lifeline Sudan, which is the UN's umbrella operation for relief operations into southern Sudan.
Sometimes, the very best things in life are not the most obviously so when they are first presented to our attention. And so it was with Loki. When I was first told that I was going to have to go live in a tent in the desert, I gave serious thought to quitting my job. Up until then, I hadn't minded being away from home for weeks at a time, living in a Kenyan hotel. Nairobi is a pleasant city, with places to eat and things to see and do, like rummaging around in the city's Connex market looking for road treasure to bring home. But I'm a city boy, and I got my fill of camping in the Boy Scouts. Besides, as far as I was concerned, I was in Africa to solve the problem of famine in the Sudan, not share in the experience. So why would I want to go live in an African village? Looking back, I see now I could not have been more mistaken. Lokichoggio sits at the foot of an extinct volcano, at a point near where the boundaries of Kenya, Sudan, and Uganda meet, with Kenya's border with Ethiopia not so very far away. The landscape is moon-like, except during the rainy seasons, of which there are two, the long rains in May and June, and the short rains in November and December. Then, the hills explode with greenery and an amazing variety of life. My initial impression of the place was that I had walked straight into the pages of National Geographic magazine. On the appointed day, having resigned myself to my fate, I reluctantly boarded one of our airplanes heading for Lokichoggio, and after about an hour's flight, we touched down on the dusty dirt strip that served as an airfield. My colleagues and I loaded our bags into the camp transporter, a Toyota pickup truck modified for safari use, and bounced our way down the dirt track to where our tented camp had been set up by a bend in the dry riverbed. There, the camp staff stowed our gear while we went off to explore our surroundings.
Here we are in the camp. This is Lokichoggio, and it's Southern Air Transport and the UN, UNICEF combined. The tents are Southern Air Transport. The pointy-headed buildings in the background are UNICEF and also the UN people. Plenty of scorpions here. This is my tent. Happens to be my tent. Very small one, but it's adequate. The temperature here is about 110, 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and the tents all have electricity generated by a diesel generator provided by African Expeditions, and we have fans in the tents, so it's not that undesirable. Most of the trees are thorn trees. They're all designed for the desert, I guess. Here we are in the recreation center, built by the camp director, and has a TV. We watch videos, nothing else. We can't receive anything, so we just watch the videos. So it's pretty entertaining, considering. The flies are really terrible in this area, also in the mess tent area. The food is very good. As you can see, tablecloths, cloth napkins, silverware, chinaware. It's a great way to be on safari. And here we have the kitchen. This kitchen is behind the mess tent, and this is where they prepare all the food. And a couple of storage buildings. And the laundry. Smile. This is where they do the laundry, which is done daily. Smile. They can only air dry the stuff, and it's full of sand from the wind.
Our camp was run by a Nairobi-based safari company called Africa Expeditions and was surrounded by a barrier of brambles and branches separating us from the locals. This northern desert district is the home of the Turkana, a semi-nomadic tribe of wiry goat herds and cattlemen. The Turkana live in a small settlement called a manyatta. Their dwellings are made from bent-over saplings and brush, covered over with skins or, increasingly, blue tarpaulins acquired from the UN. The Turkana, for their part, were in turns curious about their new neighbors, or sometimes resentful of the intrusion. Did I mention the camels? They came as a complete surprise, since I hadn't associated the idea of camels with sub-Saharan Africa. But, as cool as camels are, what is decidedly uncool were the vermin the camels attracted, like camel spiders, an ugly bug with a poisonous sting, whose venom first anesthetizes the site of the bite, then liquefies the underlying flesh so the spider can suck the meat from the wound. Like I said, being at Loki was like living inside the pages of National Geographic. So, if it wasn't the location, the heat, the dust, the exotic neighbors, or the wildlife that attracted us all to this desert location, what was it about Loki that was so compelling? The flying. Flying into the Sudan gave Loki-based crews the chance to put the thing they loved most, flying, to good use fighting famine. But it also provided the opportunity to use the Lockheed Hercules to its fullest design potential, whether that was landing on a dirt strip or dry riverbed, or, when that was not possible, by airdropping food and supplies to beleaguered villages. Of course, flying in Sudan was not without risk, like the time we got stuck in a peanut field in a place called Thiat. They say you're not really stuck until you have to call AAA for roadside assistance. We were really stuck. The entire village turned out to try and dig us out of the black cotton soil, but to no avail. So we had to radio back to Loki and have them send a de Havilland Buffalo with a load of shovels and airdrop pallets so we could build a ramp to get back onto solid ground. We had to abandon the airplane overnight and then come back the next day to fly it out. Then there was the time one of our airplanes fell into a well, damaging a propeller. That time, our Brit mechanics had to fly up to do an engine and prop change in the field. Faced with a lack of facilities, they simply hung the spare engine in a tree while they lowered the damaged engine onto an engine cradle using the overwing crane. Then they got the new engine out of the tree and hung it on the wing and installed the propeller. When it came to working small miracles under difficult circumstances, nobody beat these guys. What began as a small-scale operation to bring relief to southern Sudan grew in scope and scale as more relief agencies and NGOs joined hands under the UN banner. Eventually, USAID paid to lengthen and pave the Loki airstrip, thus allowing all-weather operations. More aircraft began basing at Loki, joining us, the Red Cross, and the missionary outfits Air Serv and Mission Aviation Fellowship, until, one day, Loki became the busiest airport in all of Kenya. Loki even appeared in the Oscar-winning movie adaptation of John le Carré's novel, The Constant Gardener. But sadly, we were not there to see that day. In 1995, Southern Air Transport pulled out of Loki, ceding the field to two competitors, Transafrique of Angola and a South African company, SAF Air Freighters. As for me, I went off to fly jumbo jets, but I never liked that job very much, and eventually I went back to flying Hercs, first with SAF Air and then with Transafrique, always with the idea that one day I would get back to Loki for one last adventure. Of course, I knew that if and when that day came, things wouldn't be quite the same as they were. And they weren't.
This is the entrance to the Cape Camp. This is going to be my home for the next few months. As you can see, it's a far cry from our old camp down the river. And maybe you'd like to take a moment and go for a little stroll and show you some of the highlights of the place. The tents are long gone. Now we live in tukels, round huts with conic roofs. The long drops, too, are a thing of the past. The tukels have indoor plumbing with both a shower and a flush toilet.
A most welcome innovation has been the installation by the camp staff of stone walkways throughout Kate Camp. These eliminate having to slog through the cloying red mud during rainy season. This particular path leads to the front door of my tukel.
As you can see, it's pretty bright and airy. Got a good-sized rack here. Nice big windows let in a lot of sunlight and some air. And over here we have a desk, reading lamp, electricity. Pretty comfortable, actually. Overhead providing a little bit of cooling. We have a ceiling fan. There's a swamp cooler here as well for when weather gets really warm, although today it's off because it's cool and really kind of pleasant. Here is the bathroom area. As I mentioned, we have indoor plumbing now, which is really quite a treat. Here's the vanity where I get up in the morning and brush my teeth and shave. Over here in the corner, we have the shower. Showers here are cold. There's only one temperature for the water. Fortunately, we're down here on the equator, so it's not really too brutal in the morning when you get underneath that cold stream. And of course, we have that sine qua non of a civilized man, the flush toilet, which is a welcome change from having to go out in the middle of the night armed with a golf club and a flashlight on your way to the long drop, hoping that you don't run into a snake or some kind of poisonous bug on your way to the can. Oh, hello. Well, as you can see behind me, or maybe you can hear it, it's raining again. This is December, and it is the rainy season. Depending on who you talk to, I say it's the long rains. Patrick, my co-pilot, says it's the short rains. But all that notwithstanding, it's been raining for the last month, and as you can see behind me, it's left the place pretty lush. It's cool this time of year, certainly a lot cooler than the normal dry season when the temperature gets up over 100. It's probably in the 80s right now, maybe 85. Pretty comfortable, even a little bit cool when the rain is falling. You can hear the birds all around singing and enjoying themselves. It's really kind of a pleasant time of year. Well, as you can see, the rainy season brings with it an explosion of color. Little wildflowers popping up here in front of the tukel area. Here's the swimming pool. Far cry from the old days when we didn't have any kind of social amenities at all. However, is so typically African. Hasn't worked in a couple of years.
There has just been an election here in Kenya whereby the country has chosen a new president, only the third man to hold the office in Kenya's 40 years of independence. The radio, TV, and newspapers are full of the kind of political chatter we Americans take for granted, but was formerly suppressed by the outgoing government of Daniel Arap Moi. The Kenyans are excited by the change of government and certainly have high expectations for the new president, Mwai Kibaki. But only time will tell if their expectations are justified.
The National Rainbow Coalition includes many of the same faces who were running Kenya until they switched to his campaign a couple of months ago. Nonetheless, the peaceful transition has been welcomed by the international community.
Where once there were only a few dozen people working out of Loki, now there are many relief agencies with hundreds of personnel working under the umbrella of Operation Lifeline Sudan. Several camps have sprung up to house and cater to these relief workers. Transafrique is based at Kate Camp, whose weekly barbecue is a welcome event for all. Here are my crewmates, John Munyi, the flight engineer, and Patrick Akinya, my co-pilot, waiting for the dinner bell to ring. One thing that hasn't changed over the years is the nature of the work. The working day begins well before sunrise and continues until it's too dark to land on Loki's unlighted airstrip. The mix of aircraft is now quite eclectic, with ex-Soviet Air Force Antonovs mixing with civilian de Havilland Buffaloes, ancient Douglas DC-3s, Cessna Caravans, and of course, our old Lockheed Hercs. Loki is now the main gateway for people traveling to and from South Sudan. In addition to having a control tower, Loki now has customs and immigration facilities and even an airline terminal with cafe to service the passengers on the daily jet service from Nairobi. Where OLS was formerly a mostly European and American operation, it has become a much more international affair with large contingents of Kenyans, Sudanese, South Africans, and Filipinos working alongside the British, French, and scattering of Russians, Bulgarians, and Americans.
Force heading into checklist. Loki, you're in Lima 005, Whiskey, morning again.
5 Whiskey, good morning again.
005 Whiskey, requesting startup level 200, destination Darjo, 001. We got 35.5 hours on 5 o'clock.
5 Whiskey, clear to start for runway 09, QNH 1010.
Roger 005 Whiskey, sound clear start for 09 1010.
In every life, there is some event or some place that comes to define that life, a point on that solitary journey from diaper to shroud to which one can point and say, that's where my life changed forever. For me, and probably for others too, that place was Lokichoggio. It was where I learned that sometimes the very best things in life are not the most obvious. It was the place at which I was happiest. It was where I got to do the thing I love most, and it is the memories of Lokichoggio that I will cherish most highly for the rest of my life. There is a famous poem by Robert Frost that closes with some lines that might make an appropriate ending for this postcard from Loki. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.